Hi, I'm Rachel, and I want to tell you something that still feels a little surreal to say out loud, even now, even after everything that has happened and settled and become my new normal. For 7 years, I was married to a man who told me, more times than I can count, that I would never survive without him. He said it like it was a fact, like it was something carved into the foundation of both our lives, something we both already knew and I just hadn't fully accepted yet. He said it at the dinner table. He said it at his mother's house. He said it in front of our friends, in the parking lot after a dinner where I had spent the whole evening laughing at the right moments and saying the right things, and he still said it on the drive home like a reminder. He said it so often that it stopped feeling like an insult and started feeling like weather. Just a thing that was there, a condition of the environment I was living inside. I want to tell you what happened when I finally stopped believing that. I want to tell you what the process looked like. Not the tidy version where everything clicks into place at the perfect moment, but the actual version, with the coffee shop napkins and the late-night spreadsheets and the attorney meetings and the specific, concrete, documented reality of what I had actually built and what he had actually owed. And I want to tell you what my life looks like on the other side of it, 18 months out, in a city I still love, in an apartment that is mine, running a business that has my name on the door. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. My parents were both teachers, careful with money in the way that people who don't have a lot of it learn to be. We were not poor, but we were deliberate. I remember my mother sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings with a legal pad and going through the month's expenses line by line, and I remember watching her do that and finding it calming. Not boring. Calming. The way some kids find certain kinds of order calming. That is who I was before any of this. I graduated from UNC Charlotte with a degree in finance and business administration. I had a plan. I was going to work in financial planning, build a book of clients, maybe eventually open my own practice. I had opened a savings account at 19 and an investment account at 22, before I had much to put in either one, because I understood even then that the habit mattered before the balance did. I was not someone who needed to be taken care of. That is the important thing to understand about everything that came after. I met David in 2014 at a work event, one of those industry mixers where everyone is holding a drink they don't really want and trying to say something memorable. He was starting a commercial real estate consulting firm, and he talked about it the way you talk about something that has already succeeded, with that kind of certainty that skips past doubt, like doubt is a lesser person's problem. He was funny. He was tall. He laughed at things I said in a way that felt genuine, not performed. When he called me the next week, I was pleased, but not surprised, which tells you something about the way I felt around him at the beginning. I felt like a version of myself that already knew how things were going to turn out. That is a seductive feeling when you are in your late 20s, and things feel uncertain in other areas of your life. I let myself be seduced by it. We dated for 2 years before we got married. I want to be honest and say that the signs were there during those 2 years. Not obvious ones, not dramatic ones, but small patterns that I noticed and filed away under, "He's still figuring himself out." He would make decisions about things that affected both of us without asking me first. Not large decisions at the beginning, where we would eat on a Saturday night. Whether we would go to his friend's lake house for the 4th of July. Small things. But the shape of it was consistent. He decided and I adjusted, and he seemed not to notice that this was happening, which was maybe the most telling part. He was not calculating. He just genuinely did not think to include me in the calculus. I told myself that was something that would change as we got more serious, as we built a shared life and he came to understand what a real partnership looked like. I was wrong about that. We got married in October 2016. I was 29. The wedding was in a vineyard outside of Waxhaw, about 30 minutes south of Charlotte. It was a beautiful day. I mean that. I was genuinely happy. I want you to understand that I am not describing a marriage I entered into knowing it would become what it became. I was happy, and I was in love, and I had a picture in my head of what the next decade was going to look like, and the picture was wrong in ways I could not have articulated yet. The first shift happened 9 months in. David's consulting business, which had seemed solid when we were dating, was going through a difficult stretch. He had lost 2 major clients in the span of 3 months, and the operating costs of running a small firm were not adjusting as quickly as the income had dropped. He was stressed. He was not sleeping well. And one evening, he sat across from me at our kitchen table in the Ballantyne house we had just bought, and he asked if I could help with the bookkeeping for a few months. Just until things stabilized. Just temporarily. I said yes, because I had the skills, and he needed the help. And that is what you do when you are married to someone and they are struggling. You help. Have you ever made a decision that seemed completely reasonable in the moment, and only understood years later that it was the decision that changed the entire shape of your life? That a single yes, given freely and with love, became the opening through which everything else entered. I said yes to helping with his bookkeeping in July 2017, and that yes eventually consumed my career, my professional identity, and 7 years of momentum I will never fully recover, though I have built something better in its place. I think about that kitchen table conversation sometimes. I think about what I would say to myself if I could go back. Probably just ask more questions. Ask what temporarily means exactly. Ask what happens if temporarily becomes permanent. Ask yourself what the exit looks like before you walk in. Where are you listening from right now? I'm genuinely curious. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like you were the essential piece that made everything run, but somehow you didn't count as a real part of the equation? Like you were the foundation and not the building? If that resonates with you, I think this story is going to mean something to you. And before I go any further, I want to ask you one thing. If you're finding value in what I'm sharing, please subscribe to this channel. It's completely free, and it really does help me keep making content like this. The subscribe button is right below this video. It takes 1 second and it genuinely matters. Okay, let me keep going. So, I started helping with his bookkeeping, and then his bookkeeping became his invoicing system, which I redesigned entirely because the original system was creating billing errors that were making clients unhappy. Then, the invoicing system led to a review of his vendor contracts, which were structured in ways that were costing him money he didn't need to spend, and I renegotiated 4 of those contracts and saved the business roughly $28 in annual overhead. I was good at it. I was very good at it. And David would tell his clients, in that way he had of speaking as if the results were naturally and inevitably his. We streamlined the operation last year. We restructured the vendor relationships. The margins are in much better shape. He would say we, but he was always looking at something across the room when he said it. Never at me. Never in a way that would prompt the obvious follow-up question of who we actually was. Meanwhile, I was still working full-time at the accounting firm in Uptown Charlotte. I was managing David's business operations from my phone and laptop in the evenings and on weekends. I was handling the household finances, the mortgage payments, the utility accounts, the insurance renewals, the grocery planning, the contractor scheduling for the 2 renovation projects we had running on the house. I was, functionally, running 2 operations simultaneously, his and ours, while also holding a full-time job of my own. And David was appreciative in the surface way that people are appreciative when they have not fully registered what they are receiving. He would say, "Thank you, babe," and he meant it in the moment. But the thank you did not translate into an awareness that what he was receiving was extraordinary. He thought I was just good at juggling things. He never asked what the juggling was costing me. By the beginning of 2019, the juggling had become untenable. I was not sleeping enough. I had missed 2 professional development opportunities at my firm because I didn't have the bandwidth to prepare. My own financial planning practice, the thing I had been quietly building towards since college, had been completely indefinitely shelved because there was no room for it inside the life I was maintaining. And David sat me down one evening and made an argument that, on its surface, was entirely logical. His business income had grown to about $130 a year. My income from the firm was $72 dollars. If I left my job and focused on supporting the business full-time, the business would grow faster, which would benefit both of us, and the combined income we could generate would be higher than what we were currently making with me burning out at 2 jobs. He had a spreadsheet. He had projections. The numbers added up. I left the firm in March of 2019. I was 31 years old. And I want to tell you that the day I put in my notice was one of the stranger days of my life, because I was doing something that made complete financial sense on paper, while simultaneously feeling, in some part of myself I could not fully name at the time, like I was giving something up that I would not easily get back. I carried that feeling home in the car that evening. I did not tell David about it, because I did not yet have the language to explain it, and because telling David about feelings I could not articulate usually resulted in him explaining to me why the feeling was misplaced. I was getting good at keeping things quiet. The Ballantine house was beautiful. I want to give you the full picture of the life we were living because it matters to the story. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen that had been renovated with quartz countertops and a gas range, a backyard with a deck and a pergola that David had designed. We drove matching cars for a while, which David thought was funny. Then he leased a BMW 5 Series in gray, $100 a month, and mentioned it the evening he drove it home, already done, already decided, key in hand. I figured it was time to upgrade, he said, as if the $100 a month was simply a number in the atmosphere, not a number that came out of accounts I managed. He dropped his old car at his mother's for his younger brother to use. No conversation. Just the new car in the driveway and the assumption that I was fine with it. I tracked our finances carefully, as I always had. The BMW payment was manageable. The problem was not the BMW. The problem was the pattern. Decisions made without me, announced after the fact, and presented as done things that were simply now part of the landscape. The BMW was followed 4 months later by a golf and country club membership in Ballantine, $200 a year, charged to a household account. I do not play golf. I was not asked about the membership. David went on Sunday mornings and came home sunburned and relaxed. I made lunch. I did not say anything about the $200. I had stopped saying things about specific financial decisions because saying them led to arguments that made me feel crazy, and I had started to wonder if I was. There was a specific dynamic that I want to try to describe, because I think it is more common than people realize and more invisible than it looks from the outside. When I pushed back on a financial decision David had made without me, he had a reliable sequence of moves. The first move was to reframe the issue. You're not talking about the membership. You're talking about not trusting me. The second move was to elevate his own expertise. Rachel, I understand this market. This is what networking costs in my industry. You don't have the context to evaluate this. The third move, if the first 2 didn't land, was the personal diminishment. You know how this works. You need me to handle these things. You'd be lost without this. Each of those moves did something specific. The reframe made me feel petty. The expertise claim made me doubt my own judgment, despite the fact that I had more formal financial training than David did, a fact that never came up in these conversations because it would have been inconvenient. And the personal diminishment reminded me of the power arrangement we were living inside. By the time he finished the sequence, I was no longer talking about the $200. I was defending my general competence, which I could never fully win because the rules of that argument belonged to him. The phrase had entered the vocabulary of our marriage by 2020. You would never survive without me. He said it the first time, I think, in late 2019, during a conversation I started about wanting to take on some freelance financial consulting work to keep my professional skills active. He was not angry when he said it. He almost laughed. "Rachel, come on. You wouldn't know what to do without this setup. You'd never survive without me." Like it was a joke about how well I had it. Like my hesitation to depend entirely on him was a kind of comedy. I did not think it was funny, but I smiled in the way I had learned to smile when he said things I did not know how to respond to. After that, it became a refrain. "You know you couldn't do this alone, right? Where would you even be without this house? Without this life?" It shifted in tone over the years. By 2021, it was less joking and more pointed, more used in the moments when I pushed back on something. When I asked about the $22 he had moved out of our joint savings to invest with his friend Marcus in a real estate development project in Fort Mill, South Carolina, his response was not an explanation. His response was a version of, "I make the calls here, Rachel. You couldn't handle this stuff on your own. You need to trust me." He said, "You need to trust me," as a substitute for information. As if my trust was something he could demand in place of transparency. I found out about the Fort Mill investment the way I found out about a lot of things, from a document. I was looking for something in the kitchen drawer where we kept important papers, and I found a purchase agreement with David's name on it and Marcus's name on it, and the figure $22 annotated in David's handwriting. No conversation. No, "I want to talk to you about an investment opportunity." Just a signed document in a drawer that told me our joint savings had been moved without my knowledge. When I brought it up, he said it was a business decision, and I would not understand the specifics, and the return was going to be significant. He was wrong about the return. But he was also wrong about what I would understand. I understood it perfectly. I just could not make him acknowledge what he had done. His mother, Patricia, was a constant presence in our marriage, and I want to be fair to her because I think she genuinely believed the version of our lives that David presented to her. She saw a house in Ballantyne and a BMW and vacations, and a daughter-in-law who had left her career to support the family. And she concluded from these pieces of information that David was a good provider, and I was lucky. She said I was lucky at least a dozen times over the course of our marriage. "You're so lucky to have someone who takes such good care of you, Rachel." She was not malicious. She was working from incomplete information that her son had carefully curated. But the cumulative effect of hearing that I was lucky, when I was the one managing the accounts and restructuring the vendor contracts and making sure the mortgage cleared on time, was a kind of slow erosion, a chipping away at my own perception of what was actually happening. The morning of our 7th anniversary was a Saturday in October 2023. I want to tell you exactly how that morning felt, because I need you to understand the specific texture of the moment when things finally broke open. I had woken up early, as I usually did, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when I saw a credit card statement on the counter that had not been there the night before. It was for a business card in David's name only, which I had not known existed, and the balance was $14,200, charged across 3 months of what the statement categorized as business development expenses. The largest charges were at 3 restaurants I recognized as places David went with clients. There was also a $2,800 charge at a hotel in Raleigh for 2 nights. I did not recognize that charge. I put the statement down, and I poured my coffee, and I stood at the window for a few minutes looking at the backyard. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, which is where I always sat when I was working through something, and I waited for David to come downstairs. Patricia arrived at 9, which I had not known was going to happen. She came in through the side door with a container of muffins she had made, and she and David stood in the kitchen talking about something involving his cousin's son, and I sat at the table with the credit card statement in front of me. When David finally looked at it, his face did something complicated. He had not expected me to see it yet. I asked quietly, "What is this?" He said it was business expenses. What did I think it was? I asked about the hotel in Raleigh. He said it was a client meeting. 2 days, they needed a suite for the working sessions. I said I didn't know about this card. He said he hadn't felt the need to discuss every business credit instrument with me. That was not how businesses worked. I said our finances were joint and I managed them and I should know about accounts that were carrying $14,000 in debt. He escalated. He said I was paranoid. He said I was attacking him over business decisions I didn't understand. His voice got louder, and Patricia set down the muffin container and looked at me with an expression I had seen before, the one that said she believed him. And then he said it. Loud, clear, for the room. He turned slightly toward his mother when he said it, like she was the audience he was actually performing for, and he said, "Rachel, you have nothing. This house, this life, all of it. You would never survive without me. Not for a second." He said it, and then he walked out of the kitchen. Patricia looked at me with something that might have been sympathy and might have been pity, and I could not tell the difference anymore. I looked at the credit card statement on the table, and something very specific happened inside me that I am going to try to describe accurately. It was not anger. Anger is hot, and I was not hot. It was more like a temperature drop, a sudden internal stillness, the way a room goes quiet when someone turns off a sound you had stopped registering as a sound. I sat there for a moment and I thought, okay, I am going to find out whether that is true. I am going to look at this the way I would look at any financial problem, which is carefully and completely and without sentiment. And what I find is what I find. If you are listening to this and you are in a situation where someone has turned your dependence into a weapon, where someone uses the life they have helped build as evidence that you are less than you are, I want you to sit with what I just said for a moment. The inventory is not what they say it is. The real inventory is in the records, the actual deposits, the actual work that was done, the documents that exist regardless of what any single person claims about them. Please hold on to that thought. And while you're here, if this story is landing for you in any way, please subscribe to this channel. It genuinely costs nothing and it means I can keep making content like this for people who need to hear it. The button is right below. Thank you. I told Patricia I needed to take a walk to clear my head. I put on my jacket and I walked out the front door and I did not look back at the house. I walked 4 blocks to the coffee shop on the corner, the one I had been going to on Saturday mornings for 3 years. I got a large coffee and I sat in the corner by the window and I took a napkin out of the dispenser on the table and I started writing down everything I could think of. Every financial account I knew about. Every asset. Every investment. Every document. I was not emotional while I was writing. I was precise. I was doing what I had always done with financial problems, which was to lay them out completely before trying to solve them. The list was long, and as I wrote it, I started to notice something. The items on the list kept resolving into 2 categories. Things that were in David's name. Things that were in my name or that I had created or funded or built. And the items in the second category were not nothing. They were not nothing at all. I came home 2 hours later. David was gone. Patricia was gone. The credit card statement was still on the kitchen table. I put it in a folder and put the folder in a box I kept in my home office, and I started quietly building the documentation I would need. Not the next day. Not after a dramatic declaration. That day. That afternoon. With the same methodical approach I had used for 7 years to manage someone else's life. I want to be honest about something that happened in the days immediately following that morning, because I think the honest version is more useful than the clean version. I did not feel powerful. I felt shaky, in the specific physical way that happens when you have been holding something tightly for a very long time and you finally let yourself admit what it is. I kept doing normal things. I made dinner that evening. I answered emails. I scheduled a plumber for a bathroom fixture that needed replacing. I was on autopilot, and the autopilot ran on the same systems I had built, the same routines, the same quiet competence. But underneath all of it, something had shifted, and the shift was irreversible, and I knew it. And David, when he came home that evening and said nothing about the morning and sat in front of the television with a bowl of leftovers, did not know it at all. That gap, between what I knew and what he did not yet know, was the most concentrated form of power I had ever had in that relationship. And I did not waste it. I used it carefully, methodically, in 2-week increments, building a record that would eventually sit on a mediator's table and tell the real story of what our marriage had actually looked like. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering documents before I called anyone. Bank statements going back 4 years, pulled from online accounts David did not know I had access to as a joint accountant. The mortgage documents, the original purchase agreement from when we bought the house, records from my own accounts, the savings account, and the investment account I had opened before we were together. The documentation for the down payment, which showed clearly that the $35,000 I had contributed had come from an account opened in 2013, 3 years before our wedding, funded with money I had earned entirely before David and I met. I was building a picture. I was building the real inventory. I want to pause here and tell you about a specific thing I found during those 2 weeks of quiet documentation, because it is the detail that made everything click into a completely different shape for me. In a filing cabinet in David's home office, behind a folder labeled Tax Archive 2021, I found the paperwork for a personal line of credit he had opened in 2020, $50 $90 credit limit. Current balance at the time I found it, $41,000. He had been carrying that debt for 3 years. He had made minimum payments on it, which I could see in the statements that were also in the folder. He had been managing a $41,000 line of credit in his name alone, with interest charges that had been quietly accumulating, while telling me every few months that he had things under control, that I didn't need to worry about the finances, that I should trust him. This was the man who told me I had nothing. This was the man who told me I would not survive without him. He was carrying $41 in personal debt he had not disclosed to me in 3 years of marriage, during which I was managing our household accounts and filing our joint taxes. The taxes I had filed did not include this debt because I had not known about it. That is how hidden it was. When I understood what I was looking at, I sat on the floor of his home office for about 3 minutes. Not crying, just sitting, letting the full picture settle. And then I took photographs of every page in that folder and added them to my box. 2 weeks after the anniversary morning, I called Lisa. We had been friends since high school, and she was now the branch manager at a regional bank in Charlotte. Someone who understood money the way I did, someone I trusted completely. I asked if she could meet me for lunch. She could hear something in my voice, and she said yes immediately. That day, wherever I wanted to go. We met at a restaurant in South Park, one of the quieter neighborhoods in South Charlotte, and I brought the folder. Lisa sat across from me and went through everything page by page. She was quiet for a long time, the way she gets when she is actually reading something carefully and not just scanning it. Then she looked up and said, "Rachel, do you know how much of this is yours? Like, actually yours, legally separate?" I said not exactly. That was part of why I needed to talk to her. She started walking me through it. She had working knowledge of North Carolina property law, and what she explained to me was this. In North Carolina, property that you bring into a marriage, separate property, generally remains yours if it has not been commingled with marital assets in ways that make it indistinguishable. My investment account, opened in 2013, funded entirely with premarital earnings, and not contributed to from our joint accounts during the marriage, was in very good shape as separate property. The $35 I had put toward the down payment was also potentially traceable, though that was more complex. She said, "You have more than you think." And then she paused and looked at me and said, "You need to talk to an attorney." I retained Cynthia 3 days later, through a referral from Lisa. She was a family law attorney in Charlotte who had been practicing for 18 years. And the first thing she did in our intake meeting was put a legal pad on the table and say, "Tell me everything you managed. Not what David managed. Everything you managed." I talked for an hour and 10 minutes without stopping. I told her about the bookkeeping, the vendor contracts, the invoicing redesign, the household accounts, the mortgage payments, the renovation scheduling, the insurance renewals, the grocery planning, the tax filings I had prepared for 3 years running. I told her about the $22,000 Fort Mill investment. I told her about the BMW lease and the club membership. I told her about the personal line of credit I had found documentation for in a filing cabinet in David's home office. $41, $0 balance, opened in his name only, that he had never mentioned to me once. When I finished, Cynthia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told you that you had nothing." I said yes. She said, "He was very wrong." She explained how the case would be structured, what discovery would look like, what assets were likely marital versus separate, what the contested transaction around the Fort Mill investment could mean. She filed for divorce in November 2023. David was served at his office. He called me 12 times that evening. I did not answer once. I want to say something here about the decision not to pick up the phone, because I know that sounds cold, and some of you might be wondering how I was so certain. The truth is, I was not entirely certain. There is a part of you, when someone you built a life with is calling repeatedly, that knows the voice on the other end of that phone, the cadences of it, the particular way he said your name. And there is a grief in not answering that is real, even when the decision is right. But I had made my analysis. I had looked at 7 years of documented evidence, and I understood that picking up the phone in that moment would not have been compassion. It would have been a return to the dynamic we had always had, where his distress became my responsibility, and his discomfort became my emergency. I had spent 7 years making his emergencies mine. I was done. I let the calls go to voicemail. I did not listen to the voicemails. I made a cup of tea, sat at the small desk in my new apartment, and opened a spreadsheet to start planning the next phase of my life. I want to tell you what it was like in the weeks between filing and the formal proceedings. It was not triumphant. I want to be clear about that. There was a period of genuine grief, not for the person David had turned out to be, but for the version of our life I had believed in for 7 years, for the plans I had made, for the person I thought I was building something with. Grief is not logical. You can know that someone has been treating you with contempt while simultaneously mourning the mornings you made coffee together. Both things were true for me during that period. I cried exactly twice, in private, and then I went back to the spreadsheets because that was how I processed things. And the spreadsheets were where my actual power was. The discovery process began in December 2023 and continued through January 2024. Cynthia subpoenaed financial records going back to the beginning of our marriage, and what came out of that process was more complete than even I had expected. The joint savings account showed my deposits totaling more than David's over a 4-year period. I had been contributing substantially from freelance bookkeeping work I had taken on without advertising it. Quiet additional income I had been channeling into household accounts because David's business had slow periods that I was covering for. He had claimed that account as primarily his. The records disagreed with that claim. The BMW lease was in his name only. The club membership was charged to a household account, but represented a personal expense that benefited only him. The personal line of credit, $41, was entirely in his name, opened without my knowledge. The business credit card, the $14 $200 statement that had started the anniversary argument, was also in his name only. Cynthia's position was clear. Those debts belonged to him. The Fort Mill investment, $22,000 from our joint savings, with no documentation of my consent and resulting in a complete loss, was a contested marital transaction. Cynthia retained a forensic accountant to value my contributions to David's business. I sat with that accountant for 2 long sessions and walked her through everything. The invoicing system I had built, the vendor contracts I had renegotiated, the client management processes I had documented, the operational infrastructure I had built over 6 years of unpaid work. She valued my contribution, calculated at market rates for a financial and operations manager in the Charlotte market, at $312,000. When David's attorney received that report, I was told his response was loud. It did not change the number. The number was documented, itemized, and prepared by a credentialed professional. It existed in the record whether David liked it or not. The morning of the Asset Division hearing, February 2024, I woke up at 5 in the morning and lay in the dark for a while. Not because I was afraid, more because I needed to let the size of the day settle. I had been working toward this moment for 3 months, and now it was here, and I wanted to be still with it for a moment before I moved into it. I made coffee. I ate a piece of toast. I put on a navy blazer and flat shoes. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, not looking for anything in particular, just checking in. The woman in the mirror looked calm. She was. I arrived at the courthouse in Uptown Charlotte, and David was already there when I came in. He was seated on the opposite side of the room with his attorney, and he was not still. He was arranging a pen on the table, picking it up, putting it down. I recognized that. He did that when he was not in control of a situation, when something was moving in a direction he could not determine. I had seen it before, but not often, because David was usually the person setting the direction. Today he was not. Today, the direction was being set by a mediator with a stack of financial disclosures and a forensic accountant's report. The mediator reviewed the premarital investment account first. The records were clear. The account had been opened in 2013, funded exclusively with premarital earnings, and there was no evidence of commingling with marital assets. It was classified as my separate property. David's attorney objected. The mediator noted the documentation. The account, which had grown from the original balance to approximately $74, was mine. Then the down payment contribution came up. The $35 I had put toward the house, traceable through records to the premarital investment account. Cynthia had the documentation. David's attorney argued that the contribution had been given as a marital contribution. Cynthia argued that it was traceable to separate property. The mediator ruled that a portion was recoverable as a separate property contribution. The debt picture was next. The personal line of credit, $41,000, was in David's name only, predating its disclosure in any joint financial conversation we had ever had. That debt stayed with him. The BMW lease, $100 a month, was in his name only. That stayed with him. The club membership charges, recurring over 3 years to a household account, were attributed to him as personal expenses he had drawn from marital funds unilaterally. The business credit card, $14,200, was his. When all of his personal and business debts were added up on one side of the ledger, the number was significant. He had been carrying debt I had not known about. The man who told me I had nothing had been borrowing extensively while presenting himself as a provider. Then the Fort Mill investment came up. David's attorney argued that he had reasonable authority as a spouse to make investment decisions on behalf of the marital estate. Cynthia argued that a $22 withdrawal from a joint savings account made without my consent for an external investment that resulted in a total loss was a misappropriation of marital assets. The mediator ruled that the investment would be treated as a marital asset dissipation by David, meaning the $22,000 was credited back to the marital estate for division purposes and attributed to his share of that estate. In plain terms, that $22 redo came out of what he was entitled to, and then the forensic accountant's report was entered. David's attorney objected to its admissibility, to its methodology, to the hourly rates used in the valuation, to the characterization of my work as compensable. He objected for a long time. The mediator listened and then said the report would be considered as evidence of the substantial unpaid contribution of one spouse to the other spouse's business enterprise, and that it was relevant to the determination of an equitable distribution. I watched David's attorney sit back in his chair with the expression of someone who had run out of objections. David was looking at the table. The final numbers were presented. After the marital assets were divided and the debts were allocated, the picture was clear. I came out of that marriage with my premarital investment account intact, the traced portion of my down payment contribution recognized, a settlement reflecting approximately half the remaining equity in the marital home after David's personal debts, and the attributed Fort Mill loss had been factored against his share, and no debt. I had no debt. David came out of that marriage with the BMW he drove, the golf club membership he used, and more than $55 in personal and business debt that was his name alone, including the line of credit, the credit card, and the obligations remaining on the lease. He also retained his share of the home equity, which was reduced by the debt allocation and the Fort Mill credit. I want to be precise about what I walked away from that courthouse with. Approximately $86,000 in liquid and semi-liquid assets, no debt, and the knowledge, documented and court-recognized, that I was not what he had told me I was. That was worth more than any of the specific numbers. David looked at me as we were walking out of the building. I do not know what he was hoping to see. Maybe he was hoping for something that would give him information about what came next, some readable emotion he could use to understand where he stood. I looked back at him for a moment, and then I looked away. Not out of hostility, but because there was nothing there for me anymore. The chapter was finished, and I was already thinking about what came next. I walked to the parking lot and got into my Honda CR-V, which I had bought with my own money 3 months earlier when I had moved into a rental apartment in Plaza Midwood. I drove to the coffee shop 4 blocks from my old house, the one I had been going to on Saturday mornings for 3 years. Old habit. The same corner table was empty. I ordered a large coffee. I called Cynthia from the parking lot before I went in and thanked her. She said, "You did the hard part." And I thought about what that meant. The hard part was not the courthouse. The hard part was the 7 years. The hard part was the slow, patient, quiet work of staying invisible until I understood exactly what that invisibility had cost, and then deciding, in a coffee shop on an anniversary morning, that I was finished paying it. I called Lisa next. I said, "It's done." She said, "I know. Go eat something." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had had in several months. Not a polite one, not a strategic one, a real one. It felt unfamiliar and good. The way things feel when they have been missing long enough that you had stopped noticing the absence. Over the next 6 months, I did what I have always done, which is to sit down with a legal pad and figure out the real numbers. The $86 in assets I had walked out of the courthouse with, the monthly expenses of living alone in a rental in Plaza Midwood, the market rate for the financial consulting services I was going to offer, the list of potential clients I had mentally compiled over years of managing other people's finances while my own practice sat in indefinite postponement. I had a plan before I finished the first cup of coffee at that corner table. I registered my practice in March 2024. I named it myself. I put my own name on the incorporation documents, my own name on the lease for a small office space in Noda, one of the neighborhoods in Charlotte that had grown significantly over the previous decade, a converted industrial block with exposed brick and good light, and the right kind of energy. I put my own name on the sign outside the office. Rachel Caldwell Financial Consulting. Nobody's wife, nobody's infrastructure. Just the name I was given at birth, which had been mine the whole time I was being introduced as David's wife. The first time a client called me by my full professional name, Rachel Caldwell, in a meeting context, as in, "Rachel Caldwell," I've heard good things about your work." I had a strange internal reaction that I can only describe as recognition, like a light being aimed at something that had always been there but had been in shadow. I had been David's wife for so long, at dinners and networking events, and at his clients' offices where I sometimes sat in the corner on my laptop running his numbers while he shook hands, that my own name in a professional context had started to feel like a costume. Now it felt like a fact. Now it was just who I was. And the person it referred to was someone who had rebuilt from scratch, who had turned what she had actually known her whole life into something with a lease agreement and a letterhead, and a growing list of clients who paid her on time and did not take her work for granted. I focused on fractional CFO services from the start, because I understood that market, and I was exceptionally qualified for it. Fractional CFO means providing part-time, senior-level financial leadership to small and mid-sized businesses that need strategic financial management, but are not large enough or stable enough to hire a full-time executive. It is exactly the kind of work I had been doing for David's business for 6 years, except now I was billing for it. I had a client within 3 weeks of opening. I had 4 within 2 months. By August 2024, I had 12 clients and a waiting list. Part of what made it work so quickly was something I had not fully anticipated, which was my own reputation. I had been operating in Charlotte's small business community for 6 years, even if invisibly. People who had worked with David's firm knew that the operational improvements had happened after I became involved, even if they had never known my name specifically. When I introduced myself as a financial consultant and named the kinds of work I had done, the context was recognizable, even if the credit had not been. Several of my first clients came through referrals from people who had interacted with David's business and remembered that things had run unusually well. I found a particular satisfaction in that, in the fact that the work I had done quietly was circulating in the world, creating a trail of competence that eventually found its way back to me. I want to tell you what the first morning felt like when I woke up in my own apartment and looked at my banking app and saw a balance that I had earned entirely myself, that no one had contributed to and no one had any claim on, that reflected only my own work in the world. It did not feel like victory. I want to be accurate about this because I think the word victory sets up a kind of emotional expectation that is actually not what healing feels like. What it felt like was solid, quiet and solid, like the floor was finally at the right distance from my feet. Like the weight I had been carrying for so long had not disappeared, but had redistributed itself into something I was choosing to hold, rather than something that had been placed on me without my consent. Patricia called me in the spring of 2024, a few months after the divorce was finalized. She said she didn't understand why I had done what I did. She said David was having a hard time. I told her I was genuinely sorry to hear that, and I hoped things improved for him. I meant it. I do not hate David. I understand that he is a person who learned to see the world in a particular way and never found sufficient reason to question it. He was not a monster. He was a man who had been allowed to remain small in certain ways for too long, because I had been compensating for those small ways so consistently that neither of us had to look at them directly. When I stopped compensating, the gaps became visible. That was hard for him. It was not my fault, but it was not my problem anymore either. By October 2024, 18 months after the anniversary morning in the Ballantine kitchen, my monthly revenue from the consulting practice exceeded the combined household income that David and I had reported on our last joint tax return. I want to say that again because I think it is important. The income from the practice I had been postponing for 7 years, the practice I had sacrificed to manage David's life, now generated more money monthly than our entire household had made together during our marriage. That number did not surprise me ultimately, because I understood where it came from. It came from skills I had been developing my whole life. Skills that do not expire because someone convinces you that you are not worth using them. In November 2024, I bought a condominium in the South End neighborhood of Charlotte. It is not the largest place I have ever lived. It is smaller than the Ballantyne house by about 1,000 square feet. But I sat at the closing table and signed my name to a property that is mine, entirely mine, with a mortgage in my name and a down payment from an account that no one else had access to. I drove to it for the first time as its owner on a cold Tuesday afternoon in November, and I stood in the middle of the empty living room for a few minutes before I did anything else. Just stood there, looking at it. Mine. I want to say something to you now, not as a lesson, not as a motivational speech, but as something I would have wanted to hear years ago, sitting at that kitchen table wondering if the feeling I couldn't name was real. The voice that tells you that you have nothing, that you couldn't survive, that everything you have is because of someone else's generosity. That voice is not reporting a fact. It is performing a strategy. It is a management technique. It is what someone reaches for when they understand, even if not consciously, that if you ever actually looked at the real inventory, you would see that the power dynamic they depend on is built on your cooperation with their story. And the moment you stop cooperating, the story stops holding. I was not weak. I was not stupid. I was not lucky, despite what Patricia kept saying. I was a person who had made a series of reasonable decisions that accumulated into an unreasonable situation, and then I did what I had always done with financial problems. I looked at the real numbers. I gathered the real documentation. I got the right professional support. And then I let the documents speak, which they do very well when you have been the one maintaining them all along. He said I would never survive without him. He never had to find out the reverse was true, because I was always there, holding things together, covering the gaps, managing the accounts, making the infrastructure run. He had no idea what was actually keeping things afloat, because I had never let him see it fail. The moment I stepped back, it became apparent very quickly, not in a way I designed or orchestrated, just in the way that reality becomes apparent when you stop placing yourself between it and the person who has been protected from it. My name is on my office door. My name is on my mortgage. My revenue is documented in accounts with my name on them. The investment account I opened at 22 is still there, growing quietly, the way it has been since 2013, as if none of the last 7 years happened to it at all. I am 36 years old, and I am exactly where I would have been if I had never stopped moving forward, perhaps even further along, because the years I spent managing someone else's business taught me things I could not have learned any other way. I know how small businesses break down. I know what denial looks like in financial records. I know how to spot the gap between what someone says their finances look like and what the documents actually say. That knowledge is part of what I sell now, and I sell it at a rate that would have made the woman sitting in that coffee shop on an anniversary morning cry, but in the right way. If this story gave you something today, if it helped you see something more clearly, if it made you feel less alone in whatever situation you are sitting inside of right now, then I am really glad you were here. And I want to ask you one more time, at the end of all of this, please subscribe to this channel. It is free, it costs you nothing, and it is what allows me to keep telling stories like this one for the people who need to hear them. If you know someone who is in the place I was in, someone who has been told they are lucky when they are actually essential, someone who has been keeping things running while being told they would fall apart without help, please share this with them. Sometimes a story is the thing that helps you see your own situation from the outside for the first time. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Genuinely. I know this was a long one. I am not a person who knows how to tell this kind of story briefly, because none of it was brief, and because I think the details matter, and because you came here and gave me your time, and I did not want to waste it. My name is Rachel. I survived without him. And then I built something that made clear, to me if to no one else, that the question of survival had always been the wrong question. The right question was what I could do when I finally stopped making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's answer.